So it looks like it's mostly online then?
So,
Should I? Oh, where are you from?
Hi, I'm from the Philippines.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming to the Hong Kong Center.
I'm interested because you're working with OFWs.
Yes. I don't talk a lot about it in this presentation, but I can since you are here. What's your organization?
Global Impact.
Okay. And what's the area of work?
We're mostly on prevention and awareness, and we work with our government also in reintegration, especially distressed OFWs.
Right. I imagine there will be quite a lot
Hey,
from.
there we go.
From
These guys are trouble.
and Hong Kong.
I don't trust these guys at all. You guys are looking like you're doing
Do you
work, but I
work
don't think
at
you
all
do.
with organizations like Pathfinders from Hong Kong?
But again,
Pathfinders? So they do,
Say that
they
again.
do a lot of work with distressed overseas workers, mainly primarily women from Philippines while they're in Hong Kong and have their contracts terminated and have to enter the refugee system and get stuck and then somehow have to get back to Philippines or Indonesia. It's a major process, a major undertaking. Anyway. All right, so I guess this is mostly an online thing. So I'm gonna actually, can I move this table so that it?
yeah, can you help?
Yes. Just so I can be, hello, welcome. Oops. Then whoever is watching the live stream.
How do we know how big this thing is? How do we know how big the camera is? Say again? No. No, I think it's pointing this way. So you're good.
I just remember last year watching a live stream of one of the sessions, and like the guy was way off to the side, couldn't hear anything, and it was
Yes.
a huge challenge. So
Yeah.
make sure.
Okay.
Hello. Well, I think I will get started. I don't suppose if there's any way somebody who is listening online can just like let us know that you can hear. Maybe one of my colleagues.
I don't think the live stream has started yet.
Oh, okay. Then I can move that in. It has started.
Sorry?
Alright. Great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Already joined this room?
Oh, join this room.
Okay, well, thank you for joining in person and online. I am very privileged and humbled to talk about trafficking and refugees in Hong Kong. Actually, can we close the door? Is that possible? Yeah, so what I'm going to do is just give a brief introduction of myself, my organization, the systems in Hong Kong. I'm going to share a few stories of our clients, some gaps and failures, and a little bit of hope at the end. So just a brief introduction about myself. You see, I'm a violinist, which is an unusual crossover to work in counter-trafficking work. But yeah, I started off my career as a professional musician in Hong Kong. I ran a music school for a very long time, which still has nothing to do with forced migration at all. But after many years of running a music school, I decided I needed a break. I needed to take some time for myself, so I moved to Kabul, Afghanistan, as you do, to relax. And I chose a really good traditional path for that. But no, there was one music school in the country. And rewinding a little bit, my brother is in the American military. And so when he joined many, many years ago, I kind of had this notion, oh, he's gonna end up in either Iraq or in Afghanistan. And I didn't know anything about either of those two countries. So I decided, okay, I have to find out. So I started reading books. Was not at the time very interested in Iraq, but when I started reading about Afghanistan, I just fell in love with the country, and I said, okay, well, someday I'm gonna live there when it's safe and stable. That has yet to happen, I guess. But yeah, I just had my sights set on Afghanistan for a very long time, but as a musician, to go to a country like that where music was illegal, there were not very many opportunities. So essentially, I think in about 2008, I saw that there was this guy who was running an NGO. He sent musicians and teachers to far-flung places to do cultural bridging. And I had been following his blog for quite some time. And I saw he announced he was moving to Afghanistan and he would be the country's first violin teacher. And I said, oh, I will be the second. And I just waited for him to leave. Really, I just kind of sat there and waited for this guy to go. And in 2014, he announced he was going to be leaving Afghanistan, and I emailed him right away, and I said, hey, can you tell me about Kabul? And 4 months later, I was living in Kabul. Now, I was supposed to be there for 9 months, just for one school year, to teach violin and viola and train teachers. But I think within about 2 weeks of being there, I thought, oh, I don't think I can leave. I don't think I can go back to Hong Kong and my cushy life and my wealthy students and those very, very global north issues that we have there. So my sabbatical turned into 2 years, and then it turned into grad school and a total career change. As it turned out, I was called back to Hong Kong to take care of my music school, and I was extremely miserable because I had just gone through this huge experience and had a total shift in perspective. You might have heard me talk about forced marriage in that previous session. I was teaching mostly girls in this school, and I didn't know anything about anything. I was a musician only, and so I had never really been in that type of context. And when my girls would hit 14 or 15 years old, they would simply disappear. They would just, one day they would be in school, the next day they're gone. Yes?
So are you referring now to Kabul or Hong Kong?
Kabul, yes. Yeah. Nobody disappeared out of my school in Hong Kong. No, in Kabul. They would just disappear, and I would say, oh, where's Sonam? And somebody would say, oh, she's married now. Oh, she's married. Like, big shrug, no big deal. And I was like, oh, okay, what? Okay. And then I saw that over and over and over again over the course of the 2 years that I was there. Also, while I was there, it was kind of the end of the stable times. There had been a transfer of power that was supposedly peaceful, but in fact, it was very chaotic. And so in end of 2014, towards 2015, there was the beginning of the mass exodus. And so I was not only losing girls to forced marriage from my orchestra, but the teachers that I was training were also disappearing. They would go on a service learning trip, or they would be sponsored to go do teacher training somewhere, and they would just not return. We would have orchestra tours to foreign countries, and kids would flee while they were there. I was in 2014, I was sent to Germany with one of the orchestras, and my entire job was to make sure that nobody ran away. And I was very conflicted because I was there with a bunch of girls who were all 15, 16, 17 years old, and I couldn't say it out loud, but in my heart I was thinking, if one of these girls tells me that when we go back she has to get married and she doesn't want to do that and she needs to stay in Germany, I don't think I can say no. And so you can see why I struggled with this idea of going back to Hong Kong, fast forwarding to that again. So after this stint in Afghanistan, I was here in Thailand for a year, and then back to Hong Kong, and I just couldn't keep my mind off of all of the things that I had seen in Afghanistan, and also the work that I did here in Thailand. And I was just like, what am I doing? My music school was on the 25th floor of a commercial building, and I realized that on the 10th floor was a refugee agency. And so I marched myself down 15 flights, no, I took the lift. I went down to the 10th floor, and I was finishing my dissertation at the time, and I asked to interview one of the program managers there at this refugee agency. And I was so inspired by everything that this guy said, and was introduced to this concept that there was a refugee population in Hong Kong, and that there was human trafficking in Hong Kong, where I had lived for well over a decade. I had no idea about these things. After I was finished interviewing him, he said, oh, is there anything else I can do for you? And I said, yes, I would like you to give me a job. And he said, don't you work in the music school? I said, yes, but this is where I came from, and this is what I want to do. So then I found myself running a music school and working in a refugee agency in the same building. It was a very confusing time for me. But all that is to say that making the transition from being a professional musician to being in a counter-trafficking space, it's never been boring. And the time that I spent as a musician in Afghanistan working with girls really informed all of the work that I've been able to do in the last decade, particularly now when I'm working with victims of forced marriage in a very different context from what it is in Afghanistan and Pakistan, where I also saw it, and also from what some of our colleagues were talking about here. So now I work for an organization called the Hong Kong Dignity Institute. We are primarily focused on victims of human trafficking, and we also do quite a lot of refugee work. And the way that we do this is very unique and very exciting in Hong Kong. We have Hong Kong qualified lawyers who are within the organization, seconded from a partner law firm, and they work together with trauma counselors. So what we have found is that the law in and of itself is not enough to help victims and survivors of human trafficking if their souls and their psyches are so broken that they are not able to give reliable accounts in their statements, or if they're not able to withstand the rigors of the legal system. And then on the other side, counseling alone is also not sufficient to help survivors and victims, because when it comes down to it, their issues are legal in nature. So we have an integrated approach, and all of our work is done as a team with like a 360 approach to our victims, our clients, as they go through the court system, as they try to rebuild their lives, sometimes as they repatriate to their countries of origin if they're not from Hong Kong. And our ultimate goal, as I mentioned briefly in the previous session, Hong Kong does not have any bespoke legislation criminalizing all forms of human trafficking. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but essentially we see that because we don't have that, all victims necessarily fall through the cracks. I was just speaking with somebody about the tip report and how, I mentioned we're on the Tier 2 watch list. I think in last year's tip report, there were only 33 victims of human trafficking identified by the Hong Kong government, 33. All of those were
Hong Kong citizens who were repatriated from scam compounds. So there is absolutely no acknowledgement whatsoever of anybody else being a victim of human trafficking. Now, my organization is tiny. There are only 4 staff, and we have hundreds of clients. We do rigorous tip assessments ourselves. I have colleagues from other organizations here who have the same number of clients, and they all do rigorous assessments. What is this disparity? I will talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but first I want to share, it's not one client story, it's many client stories that we have kind of conglomerated into one. This is something that we see quite commonly within our clients and within other organizations who are dealing with human trafficking or who are dealing with refugees in Hong Kong. This is the story, we'll call her CH, just to keep anonymity and remember that this is an amalgamation of many different clients. CH, she's coming from a country, Lake Chad area, where she faced many economic problems, and her husband, because of these economic problems, introduced her to some friends of his who said, oh, we have a job overseas, working in a restaurant. We will help you with all of your financial troubles because it's in Asia, you'll make a lot more money. And then, we're doing this because we're friends with your husband. So she thought she was going to be working in a restaurant, but she was in fact taken to Bangkok, where she was kept captive for about 2 weeks, being beaten, choked, raped, drugged, all of these sorts of things. And ultimately she was shown pictures of her son who was being kept by her husband's friends and said, look, we paid all this money for you to come out here, and we have your child as collateral, so now you need to start doing sex work in order to pay off these debts before we can put you into this restaurant industry. And so from there, she was brought from Thailand to Guangzhou, which is a city not too far from Hong Kong up in mainland China. Guangzhou, Kuala Lumpur, Macau, Hong Kong, on this kind of circuit that many women in the commercial sex industry in Hong Kong go through. She was not doing this willingly, of course, but she had all of her senses about her to a point where she was very careful about documenting everywhere she went, with pictures of the visas, entry points, where she was staying, these sorts of things. Pretty much everything but the people who were trafficking her. And a reminder, this is many different clients all into one, so I'm kind of putting things together. On one part of her route, she was also tasked to carry a bag that she did not know what was inside of it. Once she arrived in Kuala Lumpur, she realized that it had been drugs. Fortunately, she was not caught, but it made her question, oh, where else have I been carrying drugs? And some countries in this region have death penalty for drug smuggling, and oh my goodness, this is disaster upon disaster. And so thrown into different kinds of criminal exploitation on this journey. At one point, she was brought to Hong Kong, and somebody was supposed to pick her up at the airport. Somebody from the agency was supposed to pick her up at the airport to bring her to wherever she was going to be staying to perform commercial sex work. But this person did not show up. And so she was like, oh my gosh, here's an opportunity. I can disappear. I can hide out from this. As it turns out, she ended up being accused of a petty crime and was incarcerated for a bit. This is pretty common, unfortunately. She was incarcerated and ended up overstaying her visa and was advised by somebody to take out a refugee claim. And in this way, she would be protected from going back to wherever she came from. Now, once she took out this refugee claim, she became completely stuck in Hong Kong. I'll talk a bit about the refugee system that we have. Having worked in the refugee sector for about 10 years in Hong Kong now, it is very easy to get stuck into the system, to become an asylum seeker, and very, very difficult to come out. And while you are in the system, the supports that are provided are essentially what the government would describe as the keeping somebody out of destitution, and not much more. And again, I will talk a bit more about that. So right now, what we are doing with her is helping her with her refugee case on the grounds of her status as being a victim of human trafficking. Before I talk more about that, let me tell you a little bit about, about Hong Kong trafficking and refugees. So Hong Kong, doesn't look like anybody here is from Hong Kong. Is anybody here from Hong Kong? All right, so Hong Kong is a very interesting place. We used to be a British colony. Now we are part of mainland China, but we have a separate legal system. We have different money, different language, but we're still under China. But we are in kind of a gray area in terms of all these international treaties. So, for example, China is signatory to the Geneva Conventions. We are not. The UK, of which we used to be part of, signatory. We are not. We are not signatory to the Palermo Protocol, which is unusual because there are only a few other countries who are not signatory. We're not in very good company, I would say here. Yemen, North Korea, Congo, and Hong Kong. The thing is, we're not a country. We're a special administrative region, and we used to be a colony, so we really occupy such a strange area, but we are also one of the most developed cities in the world. And as I mentioned before, we have a very strong rule of law. So it is surprising that we are not signatory to these conventions here. Now, I also mentioned that there is no legislation in Hong Kong that criminalizes all forms of human trafficking. We have no human trafficking or modern slavery bill. We don't have any of that. We have a mishmash of many other things. So, our Hong Kong Bill of Rights says nobody shall be held in slavery, and the slave trade in all their forms shall be prohibited. Nobody shall be held in servitude. Nobody shall be required to perform forced or compulsory labor, etc. But this is the Bill of Rights. It's not a policy. It's not a legislation. And so even though that language is quite clear, because we have this mishmash of multi-legislation, there is not really any way to punish somebody for trafficking in human beings. It means that if there is a perpetrator who has victimized somebody, they will be punished or prosecuted for something like sexual assault or indecent exposure or some sort of labor ordinance violation, like giving a bad contract or something like this. It also means that there is really no protection for the victims. Now, the other side of the coin is the refugee system. We have what's called the Unified Screening Mechanism. This is the system by which the government does the refugee status determination. If somebody is successful in that, which very few people are, we have I believe, the lowest recognizance rate in the entire world for refugee status determination. If there is a positive determination of somebody's status, there's no actual legal recognition of refugees in Hong Kong. That means that they are not able to integrate into Hong Kong. They will never become a resident. They will never become a citizen. Few are able to work, but the whole system of it is very complicated and designed to prevent people from getting status. One crazy example of this is that if there is a child born to a refugee or an asylum seeker, and the parents put the child up for adoption, they're not eligible to be adopted by a Hong Kong person unless they have dual citizenship, that they can confer the other citizenship to that child. So even babies, and this also applies to foreign domestic helpers. If a migrant domestic worker has a baby in Hong Kong, that baby cannot be adopted by Hong Kong citizens. It can only be adopted by a foreigner. Like myself, I am an American citizen, so I could adopt a child of an asylum seeker, but somebody who only has Hong Kong citizenship cannot, because Hong Kong citizenship cannot be conferred onto a refugee or an asylum seeker under any circumstances. So this is how intense our laws are, I will say. Within the USM, the Unified Screening Mechanism, and I'm just going to call it USM because that's a lot of syllables for me to say, there are a few ways that somebody can have their status determined. Torture, being able to prove torture, being able to prove that being returned to their home country will be a threat to their right to life. Something we call CIDTP, which is cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment faced in their country of origin, or persecution. You will note that there is no mention of trafficking anywhere in here, and these are the only ways. These are the only ways in which somebody can be determined to be a refugee. By the way, I will mention there are currently about 15,000 asylum seekers or non-refoulement claimants in Hong Kong, and only 275, maybe 280 recognized refugees at this point in time. Again, we have, I think, the lowest recognizance rate in the entire world. Now, to get from the point where somebody enters the country and says, I have this credible threat to my life, I'm seeking protection, from that point to having a positive refugee status determination, it can be a years, decades-long process. I've had clients who have been in Hong Kong for over 20 years, and at that point, they get the final notice that, oh, your claim has been rejected on all sides. Or I actually had a client a few years ago who, after 16 years of going through the system, rejection, appeal, after 16 years, got a positive determination. It was really shocking. But basically, I say this because the process is so lengthy, and in that time that somebody is in the process, they are not allowed to work, they're not even allowed to volunteer, and if any of you have been to Hong Kong or have heard anything about it, you might know that we are, I believe, the most expensive city in the world. We have the highest rent for the smallest amount of space, and everything is very, very, very expensive. So to get you an idea of what it's like to be a refugee in Hong Kong, the government will give, for people who are in the system, not recognized yet, but still in the process, 3,200 Hong Kong dollars per month. That's 1,500 for rent, 1,200 for food, and the rest is for transportation, utilities, internet, and basically everything else. Now, for most people, Hong Kong dollars means nothing, but what I will say, $3,200 is, actually, I'll do this. 1,500, which is what is available for rent, is around 200 US dollars. To give you an idea, I will share personal information. I have a tiny little shoebox flat in a very, very, very nice part of town, and the rent there is 18,000 Hong Kong dollars per month. But what is somebody going to get with 1,500? You know, nothing. You can go and have a sushi dinner for 2 people, and that is $1,500. So you can see where if somebody is stuck into this system, it is a nearly impossible existence. Oh, I already mentioned this. So, since we have the lowest recognizance rate in the world, or one of them, I like to really exaggerate this because it makes me so angry that a country that is so wealthy, so resourced, to have such a low recognizance rate. Here are some common grounds for refusal of the USM claim. The severity of harm does not meet the legal threshold for refugee status determination, particularly the fact that the perpetrator is a non-state actor. Now, I think everybody in this room is working in the human trafficking space, and so you will probably know that trafficking is usually not perpetrated by the state. The work that we do, the clients that we serve, most of our clients are trafficked by their own families. They are not state actors. But this is a common ground for dismissal of a claim. The credibility. This is almost always that the client is giving inconsistent statements. They're not good with their chronology of the sequence of events that has happened to them, or there's a lack of evidence. Bringing this back to the trafficking side of things, if you can imagine somebody who is being transnationally trafficked, CH that I mentioned before, she's like a unicorn in our line of work. The fact that she had documentation of anything that happened to her was like an absolute stun. Most clients are not tracking where they're going. Sometimes they don't even know where they're going. So this is a real problem for this. And then very, very frequently, if I look through USM determinations, we'll see circumstances in the home country have improved or protection is available in other parts of the country. And so let's say, for example, if there's a claimant from Pakistan, on almost all Pakistan judgments that I see, they will say, oh, Pakistan is a large country, this person can go into any other region of the country, they can go to a different city. Claimants from the Philippines, oh, the Philippines is a large and populous country, they can, if they are not able to stay in Manila, they can go to anywhere else. And so this is something that is always stated, as if people are not able to locate other people in this day and age. And then the other thing that will be said is that the home country is able and willing to protect the claimant. And oftentimes in the judgment they will say, oh, it says in the Constitution that there's equal rights protection for men and women, or oh, there's equal rights protection for all religions and all genders and all of this. And I see everybody's kind of going, oh my gosh, because, well, we know that this is not the case. However, these are the reasons why USM claims are rejected. So what does that mean for victims of human trafficking? Let me go back to this. When people are brought into Hong Kong, particularly, let's say, for commercial sex industry, when they get to Hong Kong, there are no protections available for them, and there's no acknowledgement of trafficking in Hong Kong. So let's say we have a girl who is brought in and she is put into the commercial sex industry. I should sidebar for a little bit. Prostitution is not illegal in Hong Kong, which is another very strange thing. So prostitution itself is not illegal, but different forms of prostitution are. So solicitation is illegal. Working in a brothel with more than one person is illegal. So, you know, it's essentially most aspects of it are illegal. So let's say we have a girl who has been brought into Hong Kong to enter the commercial sex industry for somebody else's benefit. She cannot really go to the police and say, hey, I have been doing solicitation on the streets here. It's not something that I want to do, I'm being forced. Because there's no trafficking legislation, she will not be protected. She will be prosecuted. Similarly, when we're dealing with instances of forced marriage, which I will keep coming back to, the girls that we work with are, generally speaking, forced to marry in a different country and then forced to bring their husbands back to Hong Kong on a dependent visa. Now, from a legal perspective, where is the crime? Forced marriage is not criminalized in Hong Kong, but immigration fraud is a serious offense. So if a girl sponsors somebody on a dependent visa, she is making a false declaration. And this is something that is taken extremely seriously. Drug trafficking. I'll sidebar this for a little bit. It's very interesting to me that Hong Kong says that there is no prevalent problem of human trafficking. They don't acknowledge it at all. However, they think there's a serious problem with drug trafficking. They take it extremely seriously. They take arms trafficking very, very seriously. Wildlife trafficking. I will tell a story about wildlife trafficking. These are all things that the Hong Kong government is like, clutching the pearls. But human trafficking, no, we don't have that. We have drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and wildlife trafficking, but no people. It just doesn't exist. So back to people who are unwittingly or against their will committing crimes in Hong Kong, prostitution, drug smuggling, immigration fraud, these sorts of things. Because there is no acknowledgement of human trafficking, because there's no legislation, most people will not go to the police. Most people are not going to go and incriminate themselves because the penalties are so high. The penalty for drug smuggling in Hong Kong, the maximum penalty is life. We have clients who are in prison for serving 25-year sentences for bringing drugs into Hong Kong, even though they were victims of human trafficking. Then there's no protection within the USM for victims of trafficking because it is not one of the grounds upon which somebody's refugee status can be determined. And so this just makes a vicious circle of self-incrimination, seeking protection, and there's just this massive gap in there. Victims of trafficking are not able to come forward, and even if they're in the USM, they are, generally speaking, unwilling to come forward and say, oh, actually, I am here not because I am afraid that the government of my country is going to persecute me for believing something. I'm actually here because I was trafficked here to do sex work. They're, generally speaking, very afraid to do so because that is not going to help their case for the most part. Then on top of that, I will keep coming back to our extremely low recognizance rate. This is not a real protection. It's not a real protection to get stuck in a country, in the most expensive country in the world where you cannot work. Also, we're really tiny. It's 7.5 million people in Hong Kong. We're mostly islands, and we share one land border, and that's with mainland China. And I don't think most people are going to be trying to escape from Hong Kong into mainland China across that border. So there's not really anywhere where people can go. So the USM does not really offer, it's not a lifeline, it's not this wonderful protection that people might assume it is from abroad. So I'll tell another story about one of our clients. Sorry, this is a giant wall of text here. But essentially, I'll put it on something nicer to see. Essentially, this guy was from Pakistan. He was brought to Hong Kong on actually a foreign domestic worker visa. I don't think that he really understood what he was getting himself into, but he had already had a relationship with the people who brought him over, so there wasn't really any reason for him to suspect that anything could be amiss. So he came to Hong Kong on a proper visa. He entered regularly, no problem. But he was made to work in a tiny, I believe it was like a cell phone shop. And he was in this building that, it's one of these massive, huge buildings where you have everything in there from restaurants to shops to guest houses. Back a long time ago, there used to be kindergartens and dentists and lots of services that happen in this building so the people would never have to leave. The building's called Chongqing Mansions, and there's a wonderful book about it called Ghetto in the Center of the World that I recommend everybody read. The author talks about refugees living in there as well. And that will give you an idea of how somebody can actually be stuck inside one singular building for multiple years without ever having set foot on the outside. And that's what happened with him. He was kept captive in this little room, working. And he worked diligently. He's a smart guy who was doing his job, but he never got paid. And the employer would say, oh, no, I'm going to pay you, or, oh, I will actually keep your money in an account for you. So I will help you. I will protect your money for you so you don't lose it or you don't spend it somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. And so, he was trusting, and he said, okay, all right. And at one point, he decided he was going to go home and visit his family. But when he came back to Hong Kong, there was no more visa. His visa had been canceled, there was no job, and he had not been paid for 4 years. 4 years, oh my gosh. So he went back to Pakistan, and he started asking for his money. I guess in his mind, he's like, okay, no job, whatever. Let me at least get my salary for the last 4 years. And no salary was forthcoming. The employer was like, no, I don't owe you anything. And if you keep asking, I'm going to harm your family. And so he came under a lot of harassment. His family came under a lot of harassment, and he never got his money. So this guy, Zeden, this is a very, very, very famous case in Hong Kong, by the way, and I'll get to that at the end of the story. So this guy knows this is not right. I have been exploited. I'm owed this money. I've suffered all of this. I'm going back to Hong Kong. So he actually went back to Hong Kong to get his salary back. Now, he didn't know how to get back to Hong Kong because he did not have an employer. So he actually spent all the rest of his savings to an agent who said, yes, I will help you get to Hong Kong. And in fact, he was smuggled into Hong Kong. And this guy was like, this is not how I came in the last time. I came on an airplane. I came through immigration. Why are you dropping me off on this boat in the middle of like an island? This is wrong. And so this guy, what does he do? He goes straight to the immigration department and says, hey, somebody just trafficked me into the country. And they're like, huh? What? What are you talking about? This is not my problem. Go to the police. Or go to the labor department. Because he would go and say, oh, these people owe me money. I worked here for a long time, no salary. And so immigration's like, this is not our problem. Go to labor. Went to the labor department. They're like, oh, this is not our problem either. You've entered irregularly. You need to go report to the police. Goes to the police. They're like, oh, no. You're an immigration offender. You need to go back to immigration. And so he was bounced all over the place through all of these different departments when clearly he had been a victim of human trafficking, deceptive recruitment, withholding of his documents, held captive for years, withholding of his pay, and then smuggled into the country when he was just trying to get his justice. This is when his case came across my boss's desk. She was working for a human rights law firm at the time, and this case came onto her desk, and nobody else wanted to deal with it because it just looked too complicated. She opened it up. She was like, "This is human trafficking. Like, what is going on?" And so she fought his case all the way to the end, and he was the first ever recognized victim of forced labor in Hong Kong. This happened like not that long ago, within the last 10 years. First ever. And so the Court of Final Appeals did recognize that he was a victim of forced labor, human trafficking. However, there was no duty on the government to enact any sort of legislation. There was no, because this was just one case, this did not prove that the government had the positive obligation to enact legislation. By the way, along the way, throughout the many years of this case, there were a few convenient moments along the way where right after the court of first instance, then suddenly there comes this document saying, oh, we're going to start doing tip screenings. And there was a training for 1,800 government officials on how to conduct tip screenings. The timing was very coincidental. Right before the Court of Final Appeals, this document comes out, this guidelines on tackling trafficking in persons and the protection of foreign domestic workers. It's not an enforceable document, by the way. It's kind of a white paper. But this happened right before the Court of Final Appeals. So at that point, the judiciary was able to say, oh, well, look, we're making all these positive steps. And so nothing has really happened. In the meantime, this man has been bounced around throughout the system, and there was no protection for him either within the legislation nor within the USM. Now he is a Hong Kong resident and he is working, but I will say that the trauma that he has suffered over the many years of being held captive and then getting bounced around a system that seemed determined not to acknowledge him as either a victim, a survivor, or really even a human being for that matter, has had an enormous damaging effect on him. He's gone through a lot of side issues, let's say, that are all very related to his circumstance. But again, there's really no system in place to assist people like him. So what are the conclusions of this? Kind of just to sum it up again. There is no legislation in Hong Kong that specifically criminalizes any forms of human trafficking. And that includes our client CH, and the amalgamation of the clients who are forced into sexual exploitation. No protections for people who are unwitting drug mules, who are just kind of stuck in our immigration detention systems, forced labor, criminal exploitation, and certainly not forced marriage. This also means that there's no defense or protection on which victims can rely. And that means that we as organizations, even legal organizations like my own, have to be so creative in how we handle these cases. My boss is renowned for her refugee work, but her passion is human trafficking. So we have a lot of refugee cases that come to us. And it's actually depressing to see how much evidence of human trafficking there is within these cases. We've had a number of cases that have been referred to us by other organizations who worked with clients for years before they discovered, oh wait, there's some element of trafficking in here. Or they worked with clients for years before they felt that they were able to open up and say, oh, here's the reality of my story. The USM is really the only option for victims of trafficking in Hong Kong, foreign victims of trafficking. This is the only means of protection that they have, that they would not be returned to their countries of origin. It's the only way that they can really evade being re-trafficked. But even then, we acknowledge that there are nefarious actors working within Hong Kong. So there was one case that we had recently where there was a referral from a partner organization. They said, oh, this woman, she just showed up at our center, clear indicators of trafficking. Are you guys able to do something? And they contacted us. It was 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And I said, yeah, okay, we can definitely help out. Can you send over her case, send over her case files or any information you have, and we'll do what we can. And they weren't able to send stuff over until our office had already closed. And Monday morning when I got her information and we reached out to her, the phone was off. And we were like, oh my gosh, where did she go? And so we're contacting the other organization. Has she come through to your center? They're like, no, we can't reach her. We can't reach her. She's staying in this building, in the same building that Zeddan was staying in. And we were all saying, oh, the syndicate definitely found her. She is not safe. So we know that within Hong Kong, just because you're there, just because you have a claim out, doesn't mean that you are safe from all harm. So yes, the USM is really the only option that people have to evade, or not evade, but the only option for protection against getting sent back. But in most cases, it is in and of itself a dead-end path. Within our system, I mentioned you can be kind of spinning through it for many years, but because of the very low chance of getting recognized, most people fail. And most people will get sent back to their countries of origin. Oftentimes after having spent the last decade or more in Hong Kong, just kind of sitting in their trauma and not having a evolving understanding of what's going on in their own countries. It is not a good option for somebody to get stuck into this system. The judgment, there's a statement that came with the judgment from the Zeddan case. This is from the Judge Zervos who made the determination that victims of trafficking, or specifically this man, was left floundering in a system in which concern for victims of human trafficking is mainly a rhetorical maneuver. So again, I'll just say that this is really depressing. This is very depressing. I will get to something nice in just a moment. But if even the judge who made the one acknowledgement of forced labor in Hong Kong, if this is his assessment of the system, then what hope is there? what hope is there for us to be able to protect our fellow human beings, to protect our brothers and sisters, if the highest court of our land says victims are left floundering? Well, there is hope. So I mentioned wildlife trafficking. I don't have a slide for this because it's very recently. We had a client from an African country who, this is a wild story for me. Essentially, he was caught bringing in an endangered species of turtle into Hong Kong. I know. So he brought turtles into Hong Kong. I don't think he realized that what he was doing was extraordinarily illegal, but similarly with CH, back in his home country, he had some financial problems, and somebody approached him with an opportunity. Oh, just bring this bag over to Hong Kong. I mean, like, Hong Kong is such an unknown entity to many people in the world. I'm sure in his mind he's like, yeah, okay, this is very easy, I will do this. So he was stopped coming into Hong Kong with this suitcase full of turtles. And of course was immediately arrested. He was put into a detention center. And I actually don't know what happened to all those turtles, but they certainly did not make it to the intended destination. And this made the person who got him into this situation very, very angry, of course, because he did not get his money. And so while our client was in detention, essentially, the family of this gentleman came under a lot of harassment in his home country. His wife was arbitrarily detained. There was violence, all sorts of threats that, like, oh, you have to, get this money and da 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 da. When this poor man, he's just sitting in jail in Hong Kong while all this is happening with his family. When he gets out, he has a very credible fear of being returned to his home country, because there are people, non-state actors, of course, like this guy, who are determined to do harm to him. They are determined to do harm to his family, get their money back by any means necessary. So he entered into the USM. And of course, like all people, his claim was rejected. Sad. Now, the reason I bring this up is not just because it's wild to talk about wildlife trafficking of endangered turtles into a bizarre place like Hong Kong, but the reason why this is a hopeful story is because he is now one of 2 individuals who have had successful judicial reviews. That means we have, appealed his case and brought forward a judicial review to take a look at how things proceeded and were there any errors or new evidence. And the new evidence was his TIP assessment and showing that he clearly was a victim of human trafficking. And so while his case is not positive determination yet, I believe he's one of only 2 successful judicial reviews based on being a victim of human trafficking, which means that there is potential for more. There is one other client that we were able to get a positive judicial review, also on the basis of human trafficking. So we went from 0 to 2 in the space of the last year. And that's 2 in the history of Hong Kong. So that's really, really significant. Previously, I mentioned that the work that my organization is doing and the other anti-trafficking organizations are doing is very exciting. Now, it's kind of an awful thing to say, but for us, because there are no laws, because there is no legislation, that means that there's so much potential. That means that all of us who are working in this space are working on changing the entire existence for so many people in Hong Kong. Because if you already have a system, like the refugee system is well established, it's not going to change, or it's not going to change for the better. So people who are stuck in the refugee system, things are not going to probably, the laws are not going to change positively because they already exist. But because there are no specific laws against human trafficking, that means that there is a potential that we can get them established. We can get policies established. We can work with the lawmakers. We can work with other organizations. And so my organization does strategic litigation, which means that it's not that we only bring the successful cases and we get rid of everybody else. It's not that. We are very, very determined to show the government that, this commitment that they already set out back with the ZN case, by putting in this document, the non-binding, non-policy document, they have said, okay, we're doing something. Every successful case that we have, whether it is forced labor, forced marriage, criminal exploitation, any successful case that we have has the power to set a precedent that will affect the lives of many, many, many other people. So I like to think about this kind of like an IKEA cabinet. I've moved a lot, so I have assembled a lot of IKEA cabinets. So when you put one of these cabinets together, in order to put the shelf in, you have to put in those little, the little metal peg things. So the way we look at it is each one of our cases, even if forced labor doesn't sound like it has anything to do with forced marriage, it's still under this very large trafficking umbrella. Each one of these successful cases is one of these little pegs. We cannot put a shelf on top of the ZN case. That is not enough. But we have the ZN case. We had one successful dissolution of a forced marriage. That's another peg. We need a couple more pegs, and on top of that, we can put a shelf. And on top of that shelf are policies, protections, defenses, all of these different types of mechanisms that can protect people and inform the general public and work with the government to have a really positive effect. So, I did mention we've had those two positive judicial reviews. I'm an optimist in my heart, which is, I think, necessary if we're in this type of industry. I am optimistic that we will be able to win those cases, and those will become two other little pegs that we can put into this and put some legislation on top of that. The wonderful thing about working in a system that doesn't exist is that we have the opportunity to establish it, and we have the opportunity to establish it well. And if we are successful in being able to get some sort of anti-trafficking policy in place, it means that we have the opportunity to do it in a very modern way. And that's a very exciting thing to be in. So I'll close with one of these quotes from my favorite poet, Rumi. Where there is ruin, there is hope for a treasure. We are all in the business of working in the ruins. But the cases that we work with here and these little steps forward that we take really show that there is hope and that there is hope for treasure, at least in Hong Kong. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to answer any questions either from you guys or from online. Thanks. But actually, before you ask questions, I would like to ask questions from you guys. And I actually don't know how much time I have or what. 18 minutes. Fantastic. I am wondering why, if you can tell me why you chose to come to a Hong Kong specific presentation. I already know yours.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I can share. I work mostly I work in Thailand. But suddenly my boss, but my organization, the Norwegian Mission Society, we also have work in Hong Kong.
Oh.
And suddenly my boss, he challenged me to look after a project in Hong Kong, where it's like a, I will not run it for sure, but there is a church in Hong Kong that has a migration project, and they asked for support from our organization. So I will go there on Saturday. I stay in Hong Kong for 1 week and I will learn more. So this was like, I'm Christian, so I think, this is like the perfect, God sent you to me, so I can learn a lot.
Wow. What church?
Kowloon Church.
Kowloon Union Church?
Yeah, you know that one?
Yes. Anybody who's interested in Hong Kong, Kowloon Union Church is one of the oldest churches in Hong Kong, but they are also known for their social justice work. They've been working with the refugee community for a very, very, very long time. Pastor Maggie, who I'm sure you're going to encounter.
That's the one
Oh,
I will work together with.
She will teach you everything that you ever needed to know and much more. You know, I'm actually glad you bring this up because I mentioned the allowances and the supports given by the government to refugees and asylum seekers is very, 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 very low. And again, I'll say, a rent in a very small place, $18,000. And how much does the government give to asylum seekers for their rent? $1,500. So you can't exist on this. Nobody can exist on this. So that means that the refugee community have to turn to all of the different NGOs and churches. I would say, let's see, there are probably 5 major refugee serving organizations, and there are a number of migrant domestic worker organizations who have a huge amount of overlap with refugee sector and the trafficking sector. You know, Hong Kong is a very, very small place. We have a lot of NGOs because the needs are very high. We are an extraordinarily wealthy city, but the inequality, I don't remember what the number is, but the Gini coefficient in Hong Kong is unreal. So our population of 7.5 million, we have 1 million people living under the poverty line. That's crazy. So that's just Hong Kong citizens. Then if you have any sort of migrant, whether migrant domestic workers, refugees, asylum seekers, victims of human trafficking, they're going to be even lower on that. So I will give you my card and I'll be happy to chat to you when you are in Hong Kong.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So anybody else? Oh, yes.
The opposite. I actually just finished work with Salvation Army and been supporting Salvation Army in Hong Kong for 3 years, trying to expand their services in there. And this answers so many questions about the challenges we face. So there's an English-speaking church run by Salvation Army that we have like temporary shelter for the migrant domestic workers that have issues with employer.
Yes.
And we wanted to expand that and applied for government funding and got rejected.
Yeah.
For obvious reason now.
Mm-hmm.
And then also we have near the headquarters of Salvation Army, there's a red district area that we will look into doing work there. And after assessment, just concluded we're not ready because it's too complicated. And yeah, again, this answers a lot of questions on that. But then we were able to create videos on like awareness on online scamming, you know, the forced scamming in like the local languages in animated version, because that one supported, and then you know the government recognized that.
Yes.
So it's just I had so many questions that just got the answer like 3 weeks after I quit my job. So yeah.
Well, I hope that gives some closure to you. Since I know there are other people working in the migrant domestic worker space, which has a huge, like I said, a huge overlap in Hong Kong. I'll speak a little bit about that. So, where to start? As I mentioned in the previous panel, we have around 375,000 migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong. And you know, our entire economy depends on migrant domestic workers. I would not be able to work if I didn't have my helper. I owe my entire career to her essentially, because I have a small child and I wouldn't be able to work. Yeah, anyway, so everybody, we rely so heavily, and I would like to say that most of us really respect and appreciate and treat our helpers very, very well. However, this is not the case. I think in all forms of human trafficking, the ones that we see in Hong Kong, the ones that you guys deal with in your respective countries. The common element, I know people were talking about digital things, financial things. No, I think the common element in all forms of human trafficking is a disrespect for human life, or a lack of acknowledgement that somebody is a human being. So there's the common element is depravity. And so unfortunately, there is despite the fact that we majority respect and compensate our migrant domestic workers, there are so many instances where this is not the case. This is where there's some commonalities with the intersection between the refugee space and the trafficking space, and the migrant domestic worker space and the refugee space. There are two policies within the migrant domestic worker regime, let's say, that make our migrant domestic workers very, very vulnerable. First one being what's called the live-in rule. There is a requirement that migrant domestic workers must live with their employers. No exceptions, unless they are not migrant. So if you have a local Chinese domestic worker, she does not have to live with you. But Shantanu asked where most of our migrant domestic workers are from: Philippines and Indonesia, vast majority. So there's a requirement they must live in your home. Again, if anybody here has been to Hong Kong, you know our space is extremely limited, extremely limited. My flat, 425 square feet, is like a mansion in Hong Kong. I remember when I moved into it, I was like, am I rich? Like, what is this 425 square feet? I was living there when I was single. That was before the husband, before the child, before the cats, 425 square feet, like that is a major undertaking. My next door neighbors, and our spaces are not only very, very small, but we're very crowded. So I can watch my neighbor's TV, right? And this is normal. This is normal. In my neighbor's home, it's, and I lived in the same apartment for like 15 years. So I have seen this family evolve over the years. Started off as grandma and grandpa. At one point, adult son moved in, his wife moved in. Then they have a kid, then they have a helper. So that's how many adults? 5 adults and a child. And they also had a cat. In 425 square feet. So this is very, very difficult. If any of you have ever lived in close quarters with many, many, many other human beings, it can become a very tense situation. And it is not a good environment for migrant domestic workers, I will say. I remember one time I was looking for a new flat, and in Hong Kong you go and see like 25 flats in a weekend because you have to act quickly. Anyway, I remember being shown a few flats where the agent was like, "Oh look, there's a helper space," and I was like, "A what? A helper space?" This is before I was married. I didn't have a kid. I didn't have a helper. And the cabinet space above the kitchen sink had been converted into a bed like with a door. And they're like, "Yeah, look at this. Your helper can have her own space. She doesn't have to sleep in the living room." This is not uncommon. The fact that a property agent was like, "Wow, look at how luxurious your helper space is." I was like, what? So you can see this is not, this is number one, very, very difficult. Number two is called the 2-week rule. 2-week rule means that if a helper is terminated, her contract is terminated either by herself or by her employer, she has 2 weeks to find a new job, at which point she must leave Hong Kong. Must. 2 weeks is nothing. Has anybody in here been on the job hunt within the last year? How long does it take? Can you find a new job within 2 weeks? And by the way, you have to live with your boss. So these things make the space very vulnerable for migrant domestic workers. Now imagine something like a crisis pregnancy. There's no law that says, I'm not going to say that because I don't know if it's true. It is not uncommon for a helper's contract to be terminated if she falls pregnant. When a contract is terminated, you will lose your access to the public health care system. So we have excellent public health care, universal. As long as you have Hong Kong ID, you can go to any hospital, you can get medical services, and it's top class. But if a helper is terminated because she's pregnant, that means that she can no longer access the healthcare system. Now imagine if this woman is from Indonesia, for example, and falls pregnant with somebody who is not her husband, or somebody who is not Muslim, not Indonesian, not approved by the family. It will be very difficult for her to go back home. It will be very difficult for her to go back to her village in Indonesia with an illegitimate child and face all of those consequences. Now, I am not saying that she will be persecuted or that she will be killed or anything like this. No, I actually think that most people will be able to access resources. But you can imagine the absolute fear. Any of you women in here who have ever had a kid, you will know that pregnancy is a terrifying experience because you know your life is about to completely change. Now, throw into that, she's been terminated. She has 2 weeks to find somebody to hire her as a pregnant woman who is not going to be able to care for this person's children in a couple months, not going to be able to perform her duties in a couple months because she needs rest. And there's no obligation to provide a migrant domestic worker with maternity leave, by the way. So what is she going to do? What alternative does she have? Find this unicorn employer who's going to be like, yeah, you're pregnant, I'll hire you, I don't know you at all. Or go back to her village where she suspects that she's going to come to some harm. A lot of women end up going into the USM. Their cases will never be successful, but they enter into the USM and they get stuck. Now, if any of these cases come to us, we always advise them, do not do this. Go back home, figure it out with your family. Nothing can be worse than getting stuck in this system with your child who will be stateless, your child who will have no future in Hong Kong. Remember, they are never eligible to become a Hong Kong resident. Never. They will never be a Hong Kong citizen. Yes, they will be allowed to go to school, but then what? They're not allowed to work. What kind of future is going to happen? But when you are in a crisis like this, a lot of women end up stuck in this system. And it's a huge complication. Then the other side of this, the migrant domestic worker aspect, is that because women are very, very vulnerable and they don't make very much money, they are a lot more vulnerable to getting scammed, to, I would say they're more vulnerable to trafficking than other people because there are always people looking to exploit others for their own purposes. There are also, one of my colleagues out there has dealt a lot with really, really deceptive recruitment. People saying, "Oh, come over as a foreign domestic worker, but once you get here, you can go into the USM. The government will pay for this, that, and the other." And when they get here, or when they get to Hong Kong, and indeed enter the USM, or are stopped at immigration. After having spent their entire life savings to, get there, they are stuck with this reality that, oh, I've just given up my entire life to enter into the USM, and somebody is now taking that government support money. Migrant domestic workers are very, very vulnerable to all these forms of exploitation. I say I only have a few minutes left. Any other questions? But yes, sir.
I'm here because one of my friends from Malaysia is working in Pforte.
Oh.
In a church.
Oh.
Yeah. So
Pforte.
I was curious about what's happening in Hong Kong.
Ah, well, here's some of it. It's not all bad. We have amazing food. We have not great weather. I think a bunch of people were unable to come to the conference on time because we have a massive typhoon. There are many other things about Hong Kong that are wonderful. And as I mentioned before, we do have a very strong rule of law,
very low corruption. There are so many things about Hong Kong that are wonderful, which is why for those of us operating in this space, it's always a very jarring sense of discord. How can these things be happening in a place with the court system that we have? How can these things be happening in a place where we have the police force that we have? You know, it's really shocking for us. So tell your friend it's totally fine to live in Hong Kong. Totally fine. All right. Any other one question? Yes.
I just wondered, it seems like nothing changed when the government changed, because like you're talking about relying on these various laws that don't address trafficking specifically, but that you can bring into a case, and they're obviously not new. So did you see no difference working in this space from British to Chinese?
So would you like to know something amazing? Mainland China has very good anti-trafficking laws. And so one thing that my organization, we always kind of are like, we should just, if we could just be more like mainland China. No, mainland China has much more rigorous and effective anti-trafficking laws. And so, I mean, I wasn't there before the handover, so I don't know how things were. So I can't really answer that question about has it changed much since then. But what I can say is that, again, just to reiterate, since we don't have specific legislation, we are able to look forward, and we can also look northward and say, hey, they've got some good policies up in place there. Can we do the same thing? Which is a lot easier to do than to say, oh, we have this really bad law that needs to be changed. There is rarely, in any context, a strong will to change an existing law, right? But there is potential to enact a good one where it does not exist. So again, where there is ruin, there is hope for treasure, and my time is all up. I apologize to everybody online that I didn't even look. I will answer any questions from the app after this. So thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I'll see you in Hong Kong next week.
Maybe.
And maybe I will see you in Taipei sometime when you visit your friend. Thank you. And thank you guys.
With the 24-hour breaks. Were you beneficiaries?
I met one of the.
I think
Yeah, it's cool. She's coming in. She's coming in.